to the speaker, but I want to remind you that during this presentation, we're going to be having a giveaway, not of a book, but of a subscription to Multilingual. So for the best question that is asked during the presentation. So Josef Kubovsky, the CEO of Nimdzi Insights, is going to be presenting a topic that I think really has impacted most everybody that's worked in language, the challenges or top 5 challenges on migration. So, hi, Josef. How you doing?
Good morning, Brian. What time is it for you?
It's actually 9:46 in the morning. So
it's
not that
bad, is it? Not that
no,
bad.
Not at all.
All right. I see.
No. So, happy to have you with us. I won't take up more of your time because I want you to get to your presentation. Again, it's a super interesting topic on why companies avoid TMS migration. So I think it's affected us all. I will give the floor to you. I'll pop back in right before QA, and that should also indicate time so we can move to the QA session after that.
Excellent. And Brian, feel free to jump in anytime if there's anything you see that, or that you disagree with what I'm saying or anything like that. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the time and being part of such a great crowd. It's always a pleasure. I will start sharing my screen, but let me give you a little bit of a background. Why I decided to go for this topic. Why have I decided to go for this topic? Is especially because, you know, there is tons of different institutions or localization buyers or even vendors who are considering whether they should implement a new technology, doesn't matter if it's a TMS or any other, or whether they should just stick with what they have. If they decide that they want to go further, what should it be, and so on. I won't be taking too much of your time by introductions. Let me just also say who we are. We're adding value to people like you, to professionals, by education, consultancy, and research, anything that's related to the language service industry. I have picked 4 typical organizations here, especially on the buyer side, who decide whether they should be actually going for the language, for the technology around languages. And these are typically small companies who are kind of, you know, just getting out there. And most of it, they want to automate the workflow. There's actually not too much need for them to have it. It would be nice to have, and they're slowly moving there to the level. So maybe they don't even have a localization department yet. It's a part of, let's say, some content division or marketing division, but it's becoming bigger, especially in the last year. You surely saw the Nimdzi 100 webinar or just the report itself, where we said that the e-commerce industry has grown what was expected to be growing for next 10 years. They've actually managed to do it in 3 months. So there's a huge progress with those companies. And what do we do now? Where do we pick it? So that's the first type of organization. The second one is someone who already, you know, they kind of created the localization department, and where do we start from? We probably need a budget if we've already invested in this. They do have some, but limited budget. They probably have an expert who's been doing localization before in some other organization, but they need to convince the management, the CFO, that, yeah, we should be doing this and that. So surely they will not walk in and say, okay, let's spend $200,000 or $100,000 a year on a technology that will help us, you know, boosting our international approach. So they have to be very careful in what they're doing. Then the third one, it's my favorite, and you're going to find, again, tons of those that have been investing huge amount of money in the last decades, if not longer, into setting up their processes, workflows around localization. It doesn't have to be TMS only, but anything that has been integrated to the workflow. And we spent 1, 2, 3, 5, maybe more million already on this process, and now we should change it. Should we really do it? And nobody wants to really be in the position of like, I spent so much money on the migration and now it wasn't worth it. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think these people will stay there? That's the major risk, what they're afraid of. And then we have the multi-vendor strategy, where you need to convince the procurement that actually it makes sense to use single vendor. And if someone tells them, Well, if you had our platform, then you could be using multiple vendors and benefiting from it and having consistent terminology. That's another case, right? So it's basically is something that goes among. So I've already mentioned those. We have these typical challenges. I don't have time for it. We're just busy. Or the first one says we don't have enough expertise to actually pick the solution. It's too risky. I don't want to be blamed. What if it breaks my supply chain? My vendors are not involved and stuff like that. And the last one is, how do I convince them if we already spent so much money, or even if we're just starting, or if I'm just being hired? So there is too many of these platforms, right? I'm showing the one of the pages of the technology atlas here. So there is, if you go to the Nimdzi page and you look at the technology atlas, you're going to find out there's over 370 platforms. I actually asked a couple of questions to those that we do these consulting projects with to help you out. But where do you actually get started? You need to think about migration. You need to compare those platforms. You need to look at the workflows. You need to think of how are we going to implement it? What are the things, who need to be involved in the implementation of those? And these are typically the answers when we ask them, how long do you think this is going to take us? They usually think 6, 12 months. The reality is that it takes 36 months to convert into a full setup of a solution. If you speed it up, if you have all the questions set, I'm trying to give you a couple of those today, or if you just simply have someone aside from you who can help you with setting up the process there, you can slow it down to 12 months with the larger scope, or to 6 months if your team is really in the first 2 groups that I showed earlier. So if you are considering, if you're planning, please make sure that this time frame is actually in it. Why am I saying that? Well, because there are many stakeholders that need to be involved in this. It's not just the localization department. It's anyone around it. It's the content teams, right? Whether we're talking product marketing, it's the technology teams, the financials, the procurement, the legal. Well, everything else can be, kind of played around, and we can play with the procurement, legal, financials, doesn't matter. But the content and technology teams are actually constantly implementing new setup. They're constantly considering, this is a new platform, shall we migrate to it? Or, wow, this is a great offering. This has been invented. Why don't we go and implement it? So if your implementation is going to take so long, you need to be speaking about the future. Before you actually start even considering, you need to make the circle and go around all of these stakeholders and see what is relevant. Who are the departments? What are their plans? And are they considering? The nice part here is that it's always going to take them approximately, if not longer, the same amount of time as you implementing this platform. So run around, make a relationship, as we saw in the previous session. I loved it. It was very nice. Make the small talks, make a relationship with the other departments, because you're going to need it. You still will need them to give you the take to be able to move on. All right. So one of the things I mentioned earlier, we're stuck with what we have, our current setup. It's old, but it works. Evaluating and migrating between translation management system is a lot of work. And there's always a reason not to do it, right? So you might be the fear of moving away from familiar TMS, even if it's the fit purpose. The impact on other teams and external stakeholders, or the prospects of the time, technical work, or cost involved, right? So here's the question that I ask those guys. Do you know what is the business impact that outline or degrade the TMS in the localization ecosystem? It's typically the disconnection, or it's our baby. We've been working with it for decades. We've been investing, building it, integrating. We have built in-house integrations with it and stuff like that. So these are the things that you definitely need to keep in mind. Again, business analytics, ineffective processes and reporting, suboptimal localization leverages, high variations, frustrated people. That's the most important one. And honestly, can we become better professionals if we are constantly stuck where we are? Can we be playing with the latest trends? Can we be pushing our departments, our teams, and the organization to the next level if we are stuck with what we're having so far? No. So let's start evaluating and figuring out whether it even makes sense, because that's the typical question where we need to start. We need to evaluate what we have, look at the different options, and go from there. So, well, I don't need to do anything. I don't need a platform because my vendors have it, and I can just stick with them. It's all good, right? What if you want to change the vendor? What about the vendor collaboration? What do you know that if the vendor is supporting you with selecting the technology, they will not just pick the preferred tools for them or something that they built in-house? And then we have this organizational culture where what does your organization actually do? Is there a business continuity planning? Do we actually have like a joint vision? We're just speaking with a company who simply is a tech organization and they just want to be on top of things, right? What they have today works fine. They're a little bit frustrated. So they're just going to the management, and the management is saying, yes, we want to be ahead of things. We want to have a business opportunity out there. We want to become global organization, and we can only do it if we use the latest trends. So it is the business continuity and then the risk management. All right, simple. Where do you see the highest value of the TMS consulting? So what if someone as a vendor or third party comes in, right? It typically saves months. And we already talked about, pressing this down and actually having less time to involved in that. We also mentioned that you don't need to be an expert there. You can accelerate the outcomes. You can simplify the complexity. And the most importantly, when you do it right. So I will keep that in mind. And I jumped a little bit forward. So what if you will be speaking to the CFO? Typically the question is, what's the ROI on it? Should we be even implementing that? So what we're looking at is the technology, research, internal interviews, implementation, and updates. These are the typical costs on our end that we need to be looking at. Now, the other one is the value. So what are we getting out of it, right? So we are overcoming the typical challenges. We're helping the other departments to be more effective. I don't need to repeat this again, but in the Nimdzi report, in the Nimdzi 100 report, it's been said multiple times that people are looking for data. Buyers are ready to invest in buying data. If I have my own technology, if I can collect my technology, and even better, if I'm able to clean up the data, why don't I just have it ready there? Why don't I plan and support my internal departments, the content creators, with the data that we can collect through the platform that we have as the localization department? I've already mentioned that if you have the right setup, you can try new things, you can move ahead, you can become better professionals. Automations, and I mentioned CFOs at the beginning. Well, you can have a control of the language quality, but you can have a business intelligence there. And now, most interestingly, it's not only about the non-localization metrics. And that's where you get the CFO most of the time. So the business intelligence plays the most important role here, in my opinion, when you're doing the internal conversations and you want to make sure that you're speaking the language of your internal stakeholders, and that's where you give them good income. Now, which data, in your opinion, matters the most when considering a change? So it's the workflow, it's the content, and here's the most important is on the top: context, integrations, business intelligence, as mentioned earlier. It's the workbench, quality, the costs, and the amount of waste in the system. Tips for those who are in the startups. I typically see that these people do a lot of research. I would just bring you to the two tools built and owned by my lovely colleague, Yulia. Hi, Yulia, if you're here. We compare the different feature among the platforms, and you can simply figure out which one matches your criteria. Now, if you're looking at multiple, you can actually look at which one fits in versus the others. and so on. This is definitely something to look at and build it there. Then the second way is basically putting together the questionnaires and asking yourself questions, whether, once again, the finance or the integrations or the transcreation or the query management. Sorry for jumping around, but just trying to give you the scope, the idea of a scope of what are the things that we need to focus and what could be interesting or important for us to look at, whether it's business, service, or what are the key issues. And then we usually have an interview with these type of guys, and just we kind of guide them through the most important questions they might have forgotten to ask themselves. And then there is typically a four-dimensional value map containing the 5 TMS candidates and recommendations that we see are the most advanced. So basically kind of creating this nice map for yourself to understanding where you are, and then having a consultation with a third party is very helpful for those companies who are accelerating, who have, you know, the recently created localization department, and having an expert who really sees the value of it and have been probably using it somewhere. But how do I do it so that we don't invest tons of money on not only purchasing the platform, but also implementing and selecting the right one for us? So I like this methodology here. The next one are, as I said, my favorite. You know, we have a huge environment, we have a huge platform to be sitting there, and what do we do about it? What's the highest value here? You know, we've mentioned that earlier. Language technology consulting in regards to the large scope. What are the things that we need to look at and we need to evaluate? So look at the current setup, survey the internal requirements. Who does use the system directly or indirectly? We already mentioned these, you know, content creation team. These are obvious, but what about the technology? What about the legal departments? You know, what about the procurements? All of these need to be interacted. They need to be interviewed. Ask the right questions to make sure that we're actually doing and we're going to the right setup of our ecosystem, right? Narrowing down the scope, interviewing the vendors. This is always a very good setup. Then the phase 2 typically is when you evaluate the integrations, you look at the fine tuning of the requirements. You would typically have 2-3 candidates here, and then running an RFP, RFI. 3, piloting, testing out, seeing whether these candidates really match with your criteria. I typically suggest only at this point to look at the pricing, because otherwise you may get distracted and it doesn't really make any sense anyway to kind of look at those platforms, even if they are cheaper, or if they're extremely expensive, you figure out that probably it's not the right solution, but at the same time, this is what we want to achieve in the future. And then the last phase, but very important, is the implementation, because you're going to see very often that we are being promised certain setup, but it's hard to deliver, because even though the organization who's actually developing the platform, or in this case, a TMS developer, could be doing their best, it's very hard to integrate to your internal, very, very specific setup. So there has to be this cooperation between your teams and the vendor teams, and you need to make sure that all of that is structured and well positioned. That's it. Brian, do I have you there? Wasn't I speaking to myself all the time?
I am here. I apologize if my camera just lagged, but that was fantastic.
No.
Thank you for that. And naturally, we can move into QA, which is, then there were questions coming in. So while people are chiming in to ask live questions, and we do encourage live questions, which means you don't have to share your camera, but we'd love to see your face. You can definitely use your voice to ask the questions. I'm sure Josef he's a wealth of information, so he'll have the answers for you. One of the questions that has been upvoted quite a bit as we went through was, what would be your personal favorite TMS?
Oh, that's a good question, but I think I said so many different reasons why you have to be very specific when selecting a platform, that it very much depends on what and who is actually looking for it.
That's a very diplomatic answer. Thank you for
Thanks.
that. And just to remind everybody, we do have a giveaway of a book, and we really encourage you to ask your questions. So Josef is going to go through and actually select the best question. So again, people continue to upvote that last question because I think they're really curious. But another one that's come in, I had an upvote, was, what innovative ways have you seen customers gaining data from LSPs or MLVs?
I have another diplomatic answer, but I'll try to minimize the diplomacy here. You know, I think the most critical part is what kind of organization is actually running it. We have very specific, setup there. There could be looking especially for the business analytics, business intelligence recently is really turning stuff into much more importance than ever before. So having a full scale of what's going on with my data, even because it's not only vendors, right? It's the sub vendors and sub vendors and only then freelancers, and what's going on through the entire food chain. I think that's the critical point where we want to have a good understanding of what's happening with the data and where is it flowing. And that goes back to what I said earlier regarding the data, the buyers willing to invest and buy data being cleaned up, right? So I need to have a good control over what's happening with the data and whether it actually can be possibly even cleaned up. So that's what I like the most from this perspective and as the latest trend.
Okay, thank you for that.
I don't know if that answers.
Again, I will let the audience decide whether that answers their question, but I think it did answer indeed. One of the other questions has been upvoted, which was, for a small LSP, how they can use data generated from the TMS and how they can benefit from it.
So there's different views you can look at this particular question. So I would say as a small LSP, you definitely need to value the information that you're gathering about the customer. So I love, and I've been actually consulting this week 2 translation companies about their website and how can they win more business through their website. And I love the approach where, simple as allowing them to do machine translation through your website for free, but having control over what type of content, how often, and which people are actually gathering. That's good enough, right? You don't need to be too advanced of building your own environment and storing your own data. But at the same time, and that's the other perspective, as the owner, I would be strongly, considering whether I have anything specific. I have a niche on the market where I can collect and be unique on the market and really focus on all of those things and gather the content and the data that could be the clients leveraging later on and could be willing to invest money. And if you look at the M&As recently, this is very much about the data as well. And you don't have to be a big player, right?
Agreed, 100%. So with respect to another question, they're asking more about the migration aspect. So do you have any advice on how to avoid using 2 or more TMS systems in parallel for a long time while you're performing the migration?
Is this a question by a vendor or by a client?
I actually do not know. If someone can actually chime in with that, Verena, I think that was your question. Okay. If you can, but if you can answer it on both cases, perhaps that would be.
I'll try. So it's very typical. I've already mentioned the case with the last type where we've been developing something and we're working in it, and now we're seeing that some of the internal departments cannot be integrated with this platform. So we extract it, and then we ended up with using a completely different setup. So I would just say it is the right time for you to migrate to a system that can actually do it all. The question is there one in the end, right? Because it's very typical that, although there is these 370 platforms that simply they cannot, manage everything. Using a middleman and our lovely Istvan Lengele and his Be Lazy, platform where, he actually helps you with migrating from one platform to another is a very interesting setup for this particular case on the vendor side as well.
Perfect. And there are a lot of people that are wondering as well. And again, apology if I'm not discussing between, and I just want to get as many questions as we can because the questions just keep coming in.
Sure.
So when we're talking about the locally installed systems, like, or as it was referred to in the question, bulky TMSs such as Trados or MemoQ. When is it a better option to use cloud-based versus these locally installed applications?
So back in 2003, I worked with EA, and we would be bringing the gamers, the community, to work with us on the content on our computers, right in our offices, so they couldn't take it out. I think, in my opinion, that is the right moment for implementing such technology. If it's a server based and you're still giving them, and here I'm not an expert, right? I'm not an expert on security. I'm just simply saying it from the user perspective. Government institutions, I shouldn't say the connection, but the government institutions, of course, cannot afford to have that type of setup. But if you look at it from the general perspective of most of the institutions, most of the organizations, well, honestly, you can have the same amount of security within the cloud as you have on the server. And reality is, how many of us do actually have the server installed in our premises, right?
Yeah, I think having a server locally on our premises is just another security risk as well. I mean, that's something that people normally don't want to get into because of the security requirements, especially passing audits and things like that. So yeah, I can definitely understand the circumstances that you mentioned. But yeah, on-site servers are.
This reminds me of God bless him, Peter, having a small translation company in Germany, had an accident and died 3 years ago. But I remember him telling me a story where his competitor would hire a thief to go and steal his computer from his office, and he would hack the computer, So, I mean,
who says this industry isn't exciting, huh?
Crazy things around this.
Wow. Yeah, that's a crazy story. I sincerely hope no one's targeting my computer. So we've got a few others that I just wanted to make sure that we got to because we have a few more minutes. Sorry, and I'm just scanning as we go through. So someone here, Anna, is in the process of implementing a TMS. At her company, which is a mid-sized tech company. It's hard enough to leverage for the budget for the TMS. Oh, sorry, and it just popped down. Never mind leveraging the budget for TMS consulting. Do you have any tips? So obviously it's a two-part question. We're looking at, trying to get the budget for the technology itself in addition to consulting. So
I talked a lot about having the interviews and kind of, scanning what is required, and what are the different integrations and how do these departments need to cooperate. And that's a great moment for change management, right? To actually change their perspective of things. And I gave a couple of tips on what is important to speak about in front of different procurement. I like to call them a swear word. But these teams that don't really care much about what else is anything else than savings, right? For example, or anything else than making clear that we are going to benefit from it as per legal department. So we do a lot of change management consultation at the end of the day as well when consulting the TMS setup. So I would say, Anna, when I'm happy, feel free to reach out to me at joseph@nimdzi.com, and I'm happy to talk to you about this particular case. But it very much depends. But I would start with having the small talks and change management conversations, basically.
Awesome. And one I think is something I'm interested in hearing as well, is tell us about a TMS migration that has gone horribly wrong. Please don't mention the client's name, but we'd love to hear about the situation.
Yeah. So if I'll try to minimize the. What is a typical budget, Brian, that you remember that a large organization would invest into purchasing a translation management system?
Are we referring to those within the industry? So, or are we talking about end clients or private sector?
End clients. You know, how much would you think they would spend on translation platform per year?
I've seen north of 100K easily.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the worst case scenario I saw was they would spend more than 20 times on identifying what is the right setup, and they still haven't picked the right option. And it was just because of the change management, because there was so much disconnected that actually they were pulling back and forth, and it took many years before they actually made the decision.
So was that just a case of like analysis paralysis, where they just keep evaluating and just keep asking the same questions, getting different answers?
No, there was much more investment in internal development on something that was not going to be working later and things like that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like and honestly, that's why I put the number of months that it takes you before you actually make a decision, right? Because we have to realize that all of these people, all of these departments are constantly involved in the decision-making process, of being interviewed and testing out these systems and all of that, right? And then we need to, when we're talking about the implementation, I already mentioned that you need to build some integrations also from the internal systems, right? So that also requires some investments. And all of that is interconnected, and that all costs us money. So it is typical that you would spend on the decision-making process about the same amount as you would pay for about the same amount of money you said for the first year. That's very typical in any type of technology implementation, right? That's approximately the amount of money you spend on it.
I can definitely see that. One of the other questions that's come in, what do you see as the most common TMS use cases you can see in TMS consultancies? Are there general categories of buyers that you would see in the market?
I hope I did accomplish the mission with splitting them into the 4 groups that I was showing earlier. When speaking about the first group, they are just like, this would be good to have. We have the cash because we managed to, and we want to push on expanding. The second group was we have built a localization department. There's an expert. The third group is we have something for ages. We don't want to leave it. And the last one is vendor collaboration, etc.
Awesome. And we've got a minute left, so we're like perfect on time. So I'll throw one more question at you. And this is one that I think impacts especially language agencies or companies that have migrated to a new or are migrating to a new platform, often with respect to their linguistic assets, translation memories, term bases. Can you explain the concern of loss of data in the transfer? And how it may impact, for example, the revenue in terms of matches from memories and things like that?
Is it really a TMS challenge, or is it the workflow challenge? That's how I would say it.
Okay, because I think from a technology perspective, I mean, when you're switching, migrating TMX files to, a new platform from your old one, trying to reinstate those translation memories, oftentimes they won't migrate perfectly, and there's going to be penalties, and people are concerned about loss of revenue.
So, yeah, it really depends. Which one are you migrating to which one? But it is very typical that, and I don't want to shoot a number, but if you ask me to shoot one, I'd say typically you can easily lose 10% of it But at the same time, there are some of the platforms, and I think there was a question from this person that was involved in developing a platform like that will actually help you to minimize the loss, right? Between you and I, guys, the reality is, does it really matter if we lose some of the data? Do we need all of that data? Do we need the TMSs, or do we need the cleaned up data?
Great answer. Thank you for that. Now it's the time for you to pick the best question. I know there was a lot of them.
Where do I find them so I can list through? Because I'm only seeing 3 now.
Oh, because others have probably been answered. So that's a good question. Let's see if we can actually pull those back in. If not, we might have to call in the big guns. And I don't actually see the audit. So what we're going to have to do is, what I recommend is we actually not announce it yet, but we will announce it on the next one once the team gets to those questions. You can go through them.
Okay, I will do that. And thank you very much. It's been fun. And I wish.
Are you sticking around for networking?
Oh, definitely. I'll be around. Okay. And I wish luck from home, best of success. And thanks for joining me today, Brian.
Perfect. Well, thank you for all the information, all the answers to the questions. It was great having you. And I look forward to speaking with you soon.